Mark Carney is asking Canadians to sacrifice even more, as if they haven't sacrificed enough over the last decade. And of course, this is coming off his recent announcements of trying to blame America, get Canadians heated, because his new budget announcement is going to be massive and record-setting. We are also getting brand new numbers about Canadian household debt levels. Things are not looking good. This is all before we even get into the updated job losses that continue to go down to the U.S. It's looking like the way Carney has handled this trade relationship could be costing Canada up to half of Canada's jobs. If this plays out, it could be one of the worst economic collapses we've seen in Canada, and the best Carney can do is try and take credit for a project that was already under construction. It's so crazy to watch the U.S. announcements compared to the Canadian announcements because the American ones are so much better. The clip we have of Scott Bessent talking about the wins he continues to stack, it's obviously awesome news for the U.S., but horrible news for Canadians, and we will get into the details as to why. There's a lot to talk about in today's video, so let's get into it.
So, because of these advantages, over decades our economy grew steadily, more integrated with the United States through the Free Trade Agreement of the 1980s, the NAFTA Accord of the 1990s, and eventually USMCA agreement signed in 2018. Canada's trade increased by over 400% during that period, and our economy doubled in size.
Wow, I wonder if that's a good thing at all.
But this process, this decades-long process of an ever closer economic relationship with the United States, is now over.
This is what he's been saying since he was technically rerunning for prime minister, because he was interim prime minister before the election, and he continues to double down. It's over. We've got to move on. And we've seen them positioning new deals with China.
And as a consequence, many of our former strengths as a country, former strengths more particularly as our economy, strengths based on close ties to America, have become our vulnerabilities. And as a result of that, the jobs of workers in our industries most affected by the U.S. tariffs in autos and steel and lumber are under threat. And our businesses are holding back investments, restrained by the pall of uncertainty that's hanging over all of us.
He did say one thing correctly there. The business investment is pausing inside of Canada. That's true. But it's not necessarily due to just the uncertainty, because we're seeing record levels of Canadian dollars head down to the US and start investing there, which we will get into. But a funny thing happened. Somebody must have slapped Doug Ford's hand and said, hey, Doug, you got to smarten up. So we got this tweet here from Melissa Rogers, and she said, Doug Ford just called the United States our greatest friend and ally. We never thought that Doug, the liberal slug who stinks like a pug, Chub Ford himself, would be saying these things when it comes to the economy and the trade relations that has to do with the U.S. But here we are. What a surprise.
We're going to have enough energy, not just to send around the world with SMRs, but large-scale nuclear, send it down south. There's nowhere else I'd want to send it to than our closest friend and ally.
That is double funny, because one of his biggest threats against the Americans, against the U.S., is shutting off power to the U.S., saying, oh, you don't want to deal with us? We'll shut off your power. Now he's done a complete 180 and says they're our greatest friend and ally. Come on, man, let's get those nuclear reactors started. Speaking of, this is the announcement they're talking about here, that the Liberal government and the Ontario government are trying to take credit for on this project. It is a great project. I'm going to get into it in a second, but here's the announcement.
Well, this is making good on a promise from the federal government. This project, building 4 small nuclear modular reactors, is on the Prime Minister's special projects list, nation-building projects list. That list is being drafted somewhat as a response to the U.S. tariffs, trying to shore up the Canadian economy and create jobs. Ontario has been coming at this project as needed to help increase our energy capacity in the province as demand grows. Here's more of what we heard from the Prime Minister and the Premier this afternoon.
The Darlington new nuclear project will sustain 3,700 jobs annually, including 18,000 additional jobs during construction. Those 3,700 jobs, they'll extend over the next 65 years. A couple of more World Series trips for the Jays.
He always uses these sport references. It's so cringe. Everybody knows he doesn't care.
Jobs like the plant workers who are here with us today, fulfilling careers in the trades, working to provide Ontario families with power.
So, here's the thing. If you've watched the channel, you know I'm a big fan of nuclear. I've even talked about these modular reactors before. So I'm happy that this project is moving forward. However, this project was applied for back in 2021, and they had already broken ground and started the project before either of these two boneheads, by these two, I mean Mark Carney and Doug, the liberal slug who stinks like a pug, jump board himself. It's a lot to say his name. But now they're trying to take credit saying, oh, this was on our special projects list. It had already started, and this is just so classic for the Canadian government to say, well, look, we're going to attach our names to something that's already happened. How about you focus on the future? They're now throwing billions of extra taxpayer dollars at it on the agreement that they have to use Canadian suppliers, Canadian materials, which again, sounds like a good idea until you realize they are now funding directly those businesses by saying, look, we'll give you $3 billion, just use these businesses. It's another type of corporate welfare. But the fact that they can only make Canadian companies competitive is by giving $3 billion to the company so that they'll use Canadian suppliers. Again, taxpayer dollars, so it's just a circular borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. Long story short, I do love the project. I hate that the government is attaching their name to it, trying to take credit for it when they essentially had nothing to do with it, and especially since they're trying to get credit for just spending more taxpayer dollars, which is why industry professionals now are predicting the largest deficit we've seen in 30 years. Everybody knows Canada always beats their deficit. My prediction, it'll probably be the largest deficit we've ever seen.
It's been 32 years since the Blue Jays last won the World Series, and this Desjardins report suggests it's been nearly that long since we've seen the deficits that could come with a federal budget on November 4th. Desjardins estimates the federal deficit will hit nearly $75 billion this fiscal year, which is $6 billion higher than the Parliamentary Budget Office's projections.
We've heard rumors that the federal deficit may be as large as $100 billion. We can't get there with the numbers that have been put forward so far, but anything's possible.
Desjardins' analysis of Canada's finances suggests Ottawa's fiscal position was made worse by its recent decision to drop counter tariffs against the U.S., as well as cutting income taxes for the lowest income earners. That was a move made this summer. Now, there are other reasons why federal coffers won't be receiving as much. The scrapping of
So one thing that's very funny is them admitting there that the deficit in Canada will be worse because we dropped our counter tariffs is in a way admitting that Trump's tariffs are a good way to help reduce a government deficit, because they're saying, oh, look, it's going to be so inflationary down in the States and Trump's bad. But now in the private reports, they're saying Canada's deficit's going to be worse because we're not collecting enough in tariffs. So is it good or is it bad?
Of the contentious digital sales tax, the rolling back of the higher capital gains inclusion rate, plus the removal of the GST for first-time home buyers, and higher spending on defense and infrastructure also set to push up the federal deficit this year.
We know liberal hypocrisy has no bounds, but we are slightly able to measure it with this video clip here.
Do you hear a giant sucking sound? That's the sound of Canadians sending their money into the United States and into the American economy. And it's not just Canadian businesses that are leaving Canada, it's also Canadians who are sending their money down to be invested in the United States. According to the National Bank, between February and July of this year, Canadians purchased $124 billion worth of American securities. And because we have seen declining foreign investment in Canada, this is leading to a situation that the National Bank is calling a capital drain. Now, why would millions of Canadians have voted elbows up in this spring's federal election campaign?
Look how dumb Mark Carney looks there. So elbows up never actually made sense at all. And the only way they justified it was like, oh, you know, it's kind of like a hockey term. You keep your elbows up in the corner and you're fighting for the puck. That's not how you put your elbows up if you're in the corner fighting for the puck. I'll tell you that much. I don't think there's any sport where your elbows end up like that. There's something else I can think of where Mark Carney's elbows might end up like that.
But seem to be elbows down when it comes to their investments. Well, they're protecting their financial future, and that's because Ottawa has been pursuing wrong-headed policies on many different fronts. First, of course, there's the trade conflict with the United States. Now, Canada was one of just two countries, including China, that hit back harder against the United States when it imposed tariffs on the rest of the world.
So this is the interesting point that he's making here, which is basically even the elbows up crowd says, uh-oh, if I want to protect my money because of where the Canadian economy is going, the only way to actually protect it is by getting my money out of Canada and into the United States. But Peter St. Onge put out this video today, and the title of the video is Trump could take half of Canada's car jobs. But not only that, it's looking like the austerity from the overspending that might come. They're already talking about cutting a ton of Canada's public sector jobs. I'll believe it when I see it, but it is on the chopping block because the public sector is Canada's largest employer. We would be talking about not just half of auto jobs. This could be so catastrophic, it could be half of jobs.
War just got real as the maker of Jeep and Chrysler announced they're abandoning a $13 billion investment in Ontario, the largest in Jeep's history. Will instead reopen shuttered plants in Illinois and Ohio, creating thousands of high-paying jobs in the heart of America's Rust Belt. Canada.
That's a quick important reminder. We've obviously talked about that on the channel, but I want you guys to remember the Rust Belt reopening when we get into the Scott Bessent stuff.
Else they'll sue to claw back billions in corporate welfare they already gave Jeep, but there is not much they can do about it. Now this matters because cars is one of the biggest industry in Canada, accounting for 1/3 of manufacturing jobs. They are the lifeblood of Ontario, Canada's largest province, accounting for nearly half the Canadian economy. And projections say half of those car jobs could be at risk in the trade war.
If we lose half of the auto jobs, and with all the lumber shutdowns we're seeing and all this, steel, aluminum, yikes.
Now, Trump officially tariffed Canadian cars and parts at 25%, almost double the rate of Europe or Japan, who get 15%. But for now, most Canadian exports are exempt under NAFTA replacement USMCA, to give Canada time to open up to American exports so we can all be friends again. Still, the tariffs are coming given Carney has not lifted a finger out of fear of Canada's powerful banking and dairy lobbies. Not a joke.
See, it's going international. Here we have Peter St. Onge talking about Canada's powerful bank and dairy lobbies because they control so much. It's anti-competitive. We have been blocking out American companies.
Jeep apparently read the writing on the wall to the tune of $13 billion, with others to follow. Now, given U.S. exports make up almost 1 in 5 Canadian jobs, you would think Mark Carney would be working a deal. Instead, it's elbows up and pants down, with Carney floating goofy fantasies like green growth in a country with one of the biggest oil and gas reserves on Earth, but notably low on sunlight and ice-free windmills. Meanwhile, Carney fantasizes about replacing the U.S. market with a European Union that's even more trade restrictive, but presumably feels more like home to a prime minister who spent 8 of the past 10 years working in Europe, and of course also likes censorship and mass migration.
Yeah, called out directly there. Mark Carney's a globalist banker. He's not a good guy trying to help Canada. I don't know how to get that through Canadians' heads. They hate focusing on oil and gas. They want us to pump carbon into the ground as a major project. And the only industry we actually can get in with Europe would be oil and gas. And one of their biggest feedbacks as to why it would be hard to do is we're already so far behind. And by the time the projects happen, we might hit peak oil and blah, blah, blah. They've been saying that for 10 years. At some point, you just gotta start.
Now, the background here is Canada's economy has been walking wounded for the past decade under Trudeau and Carney, and it is getting worse. Canada was actually richer than the U.S. in 2010. Now it's almost 40% poorer in 10 years. Mass migration is running 4 times U.S. levels, while government spending is exploding.
Operation Caribomb?
The upshot is Canadian wages are now West Virginia level, but costs and home prices are San Francisco level. Just last month, Canada lost 41,000 jobs. That's nearly 400,000 in U.S. terms. Yet, Carney continues mass importing migrants, while unemployment just hit 7%. In the U.S., it is just over 4%. Canadian youth unemployment just hit a 15-year high of 14.7%. Wages
and growing, and we'll get into that.
Are flat since 2016, and taxes take half of what little Canadians make. According to Stats Canada, 40% of middle-class Canadians now live hand-to-mouth, limping along on personal debt that's now 2.5 times U.S. levels.
And that's an important talking point for the Scott Bessent stuff as well, because these numbers are coming out. The household debt as a share of GDP from the Spectator Index on Twitter, Canada is at 103% the US is only at 73%. That's why Canada's interest rates are already lower than the United States, and it's already restrictive here because Canadians love debt. It's always been a thing that Canadians don't worry about price, they worry about the payment. And that's the only way we've been able to keep up with the Joneses, pretend we can have the same lifestyle as the US, even though we just saw Peter call us out directly. And what's Mark Carney saying as Canadians are dealing with all of that debt and the deficit continues to increase? He's vowing to double non-US exports, says Canada must play to win. And one of the important things is, to be clear, we won't transform our economy easily or in a few months, he said. It will take some sacrifices and it will take some time. Well, you guys have been at the helm for 10 years. How many more sacrifices can you expect? And as MP Vincent Ho says, it just shows how out of touch Carney is. And he has this video here.
When I was a teenager, and if I wanted to find a job, all you had to do was show up with a good attitude, put in a job application, said your please and thank you, and by the end of the weekend, you were able to find a job. But I was just speaking to a teenager from my riding over the summer, and he told me that he was looking for a job all summer long. His entire summer was spent looking for a job. So searching for a job was his full-time job, and he was still left empty-handed by the end of the summer. Mark Carney has never sacrificed or struggled the same way that young people have today. You know, I was just at the University of Toronto last week, and I spoke to a room full of students. And one of them came up to me after the event and said, finding a job feels like winning the lottery.
And it's true. Not only do we continue to hear that from young people as Operation Goodibomb, it continues in Canada, we've seen that the young are struggling the most. And what happens is you break the social contract when it comes to expectations for the economy, expectations for success, expectations on improving your life, and you completely demotivate this younger generation. And we are seeing that happen in real time because every announcement the Liberals make is another announcement about how they are going to make life worse for young Canadians. Just give us a win, boys. Even their announcement today about bail reform and justice changes and how they're really going to be cracking down on crime ultimately came down to, we will make bail a little bit harder, but if somebody's mean, we'll give them extra jail time. That's the best you can do. Trump also had a live announcement today. He was talking about nationwide crime crackdowns that will be great and extremely beneficial for the average everyday American. You know, not some major corporation winning. It's the everyday Americans walking the street, but we just can't get those announcements in Canada. Now let's get into this announcement from Scott Besson and how everything is shaping up in the US to look like a good trend, because I will show why this is bad for Canadians.
So let's come home. I mean, the economy looks pretty good. Could be growing as much as 4%. I'm looking at some deflation, energy deflation, gasoline deflation, agriculture, commodity deflation. Budget deficits seem to be coming down. Even spending may be coming down. I mean, I know you're tweeting on this stuff. Things look pretty good at home, huh?
Larry, things look great, and they're good now. I think 2026, 2027 are going to be great years because, as you know, part of what's happening with the tax bill is the president's campaign promises, which he kept, on no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security, and deductibility of auto loans for American cars.
3 massive net benefit changes to everyday Americans. Why is it in Canada we can't get tax changes that actually help everyday Canadians? And this is where you see the divergent in performance between the two countries. Because remember, Mark Carney said it's going to take us a while and sacrifice just to get to where we need to go. And the scary part is, in Canada, we haven't actually felt the effects of all of these job losses that have been announced. Most of them are for the new year. Yes, there's been some immediate pauses, but a lot of them are, hey, we're going to shut down production. Those people are still working. Those people are getting packaged out. So they still have access to money or income in some capacity, but with no potential for replacing those jobs. And like Peter said in his video, and we've said on this channel, those jobs actually are being created in the United States. So their 2026, their 2027, right now in America, they have not felt the positive effects of all of those jobs, they are winning back to the US. Most of the corporations are just planning now for hiring, for the shifts to start, for the actual production to grow. So those Americans have not got yet the benefit of the jobs. At the fundamental level, every announcement that the US makes, if it goes according to plan, means they will have an amazing 2027. Whereas every announcement Canada makes, at best, in 2027 is still going to have us in a worse position than we are right now, because it's all taxpayer spending with almost no private investment. And I'm very jealous of getting to write off your American-made car against your taxes.
You know, on the first three, working Americans have kept their withholding the same. And you might recall, I'm also the IRS commissioner, so I can see what's going on at the IRS. And I can tell you that in the first quarter of the year, we are going to see substantial tax refunds for working Americans. On January 1st, working Americans will reset their withholding levels, and they will have substantial real income increases. So that's a pretty good combination. You get a refund and your weekly, monthly earnings go up. And as you said, we're starting to see this affordability crisis. We've gotten it under control. The first thing to getting it under control was stopping the Bidenflation. Now that we've done that, we are able to, you know, as you pointed out, energy prices are down. I think that housing prices are a lagging indicator, especially in rates. So I think we could see that the CPI numbers start coming down next month, the month after.
Like he said, if these things go according to plan, the affordability in the US will get better as inflation slows down. Remember, that does not mean deflation, it means disinflation. So the number goes up slower, which is always their goal. They don't necessarily want deflation, but if you continue to bring in more jobs, and they're good paying jobs, and the inflation is slowing down, people are now able to catch up from an affordability standpoint, especially if rates do come down as well. So the affordability starts to look better, even if the prices haven't necessarily gone down. However, in Canada, I think it's possible we see major deflation, especially if they do hopefully start the remigration, which Canada needs to rebuild our society. The social contract has been broken, and the only reason we can hide our numbers as they are is because of the high immigration numbers. It is hurting Canada long term, but Canada still has all the potential in the world if we can get some real leadership in place and start working with the United States. But if you made it this far in the video, you absolutely rock. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We're trying to get these videos out in front of more people. We are trying to grow the channel. If you want to support the channel, you can do it through the link down below. You can also do it directly through YouTube. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.